So today we are going to talk about the second I am statement. I am the light of the world. Has anybody else besides me intentionally decided to make some journey through the dark on purpose? So years ago, when I was on staff at East Point, the auditorium they're currently using, I decided I had arrived, no one else was there, and I'd entered the backstage. However, the only light switch to turn on the overhead auditorium lights was in the back of the auditorium. So I'm going through the backstage, and instead of taking the easy path and re-entering the actual auditorium door right by the light switch, the power switch, I thought, I know this stage. I know it like the back of my hand. I know it inside and out. So I make a conscious choice to fumble my way through the dark across the stage. Only little sliver of light from the backstage behind me. I slowly inched my way across the stage. At this time, the drums were on the left, so I could feel the drums as I'm going, the little cage thing I'm going by. And then I realized, oh, there's the bass guitar. There's the chords. I'm going to step over those. I'm just literally feeling my feet along the floor. The further I got into the stage, obviously, the further away the light I got, the darker that it became, right? And I finally passed the keyboard, was right in front of me, and I thought, okay, the keyboard's here. Here's the music stand for the worship leader. Going to go right in between those. Then I turned and I made this very careful step down that 6-inch to the speaking platform. I'm like, oh, I made it. I got through the worst part. So then I turn, I get to the edge of the step, and I'm like, I'm home free. So with all the utter confidence, like complete and utter confidence, I'm home free. I turned to take the step down and go down, and the steps had been moved. So I fell 4 feet from the platform straight in utter confidence onto my ankle and was on crutches for about 2 weeks. And that's what I get for walking through the dark on purpose. But I mean, spiritually, don't we do that sometimes? It's like an easy correlation to make. We make a conscious decision to walk through the darkness. But the whole point of this is light matters. I had access to light, and I didn't utilize it the proper way, right? So in Jesus's second I am statement, he makes a metaphorical comparison of himself to a physical light. In John 8:12 is where he says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Now, so often, Dave made this point to me. People actually believe this is a standalone statement, just something Jesus stood up and said, and there we go. We're going to just run with it, right? However, if you look at the pattern of John's writings, Jesus often makes these claims or has these devout teachings in response to an incident. And this actual statement is no different. There is an environment in which he says these words. And actually, there are 2 environments. There's 2 scenes that I want to set in which Jesus speaks these infamous I am words. Okay, so scene 1. From John chapter 7, the previous chapter, we learn that this particular declaration of Jesus is spoken within the context of the Feast of Tabernacles, one of the Jewish celebrations. Okay, and this is a 7-day Jewish celebration where the Israelite males would travel to Jerusalem and they would build these makeshift shelters or, so to speak, temples out of branches, and they would live in these for a week. And the purpose of the Feast of Tabernacles was to remind them of their ancestors' journey through the wilderness and how God provided for them. So in remembrance of. But part of this feast included a ceremony called the illumination of the temple. And Jewish history records, it's not in the Bible, but Jewish history records that each night of the feast, 4 giant lampstands were set ablaze. And these were recorded to be like 70 feet high, each containing about 65 gallons of oil each to burn. And because the temple sat on a hill within Jerusalem, it's written that when these lampstands were lit, the light illuminating from these lampstands was so brilliant that it could be seen as far away as Galilee, which was about 70 miles away. That's the brilliance of this light of the illumination of the temple. So all of this took place in what's called the court of women within the temple. It's actually not just for women, it's just where women were allowed. So it's a much more populated area of the temple, okay? So all of this is taking place, and it was for the purpose of reminding the Israelites that the illumination of the temple, those fire lampstands, was for the purpose of reminding the Israelites of the fire that led the Israelites through the wilderness at night. Okay, so it was also to proclaim their hope in the promise that the light of God would return to their people. Okay, so there's twofold. It's to remember, and it's to have anticipative hope of that light is going to return. Okay, it's within the ambiance of this illuminating backdrop that Jesus announces, basically saying, you may be able to light the city, but I am the light of the world. Context matters, right? So there's no mistake that Jesus is claiming to be the prophesied Messiah, not only with the I am statement, as we've said before, that is a God statement that he alludes to, but also his listeners would know when Jesus says these words, they would think of Isaiah 9:2, where Isaiah foretells of the Messiah who will come and shine as a great light to those living in deep darkness. They would also recall Isaiah's prediction that the Messiah will bring light to all nations of the world. So in this one statement, Jesus is summing up that prediction within the illumination of the temple, okay? So again, there is no dispute that Jesus was claiming to be the prophesied Messiah at that point, and the very light of God himself. And he's saying that the light that I am bringing eclipses these physical lights on these temple grounds. That was not in dispute, but what was in dispute was the credibility of his claim. So that leads me to scene 2. There's a conversation that is taking place around this, okay? So the context of the conversation with which Jesus speaks these words is a before and after scenario, okay? So before this declaration, I am the light of the world, the Pharisees interrupt the teaching of Jesus in an attempt to trap him, and that's where they bring the woman that they had caught in the act of adultery, and they thrust her at the feet of Jesus, and they tell Jesus, Moses says we should stone her for this act. What do you say? Now, I don't have time to deep dive into all this, but I can in the future because it's a very fascinating story with a woman caught in adultery. But let me just sum up the fact that within this well-known story, scholars suggest that these religious leaders actually set up this woman to be caught in adultery, okay? So they're setting her up, and rather than caring about justice for this law of what Moses said that has been broken, they're more concerned with painting Jesus in a bad light because of their hatred for him, okay? So if Jesus says, do not stone her, he would be accused of breaking Jewish law. You're not following what Moses said, right? If he says stone her, he would be going against not only his reputation as a friend of sinners that he had already established, especially with Nicodemus previously, but he would also be breaking Roman law by saying stone her because it was not in the Jews' hands to make a capital punishment call. That was in the Romans' hands. So he's either way, right? They've trapped him. However, we know that through the story, Jesus turns the tables and he doodles in the dirt. Again, more fascinating things I don't have time to go into. But then he stands up and he says, to all of these men, he who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. And we know one by one, all of those who had accused and shamed this woman publicly walked away. So within this story is not only an obvious sin of the woman, but there's very hidden sins of the Pharisees in the dark, right? They were conniving, they were unlawful, they were judgmental, they were vindictive, but most importantly, they were rejecting the Son of God from a place of darkness. So before Jesus makes this declaration, he proved himself to be the light by how he easily exposed the darkness of their hidden sins with one sentence, with one act, right? But also he was also proving himself to be the light by how he graciously and gently treated the woman in her sin. So then after this is when he makes the statement, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will never walk in darkness. After declaring to be the light of the world based on this dark scenario that he has just dealt with, the Jewish leaders immediately disagree and begin challenging him even further, saying you can't bear witness with yourself, and insult him as they referred to the controversy around his virgin birth. So there's this discussion that plays out before, this discussion that plays out after, all of it around the darkness of the Pharisees and the religious leaders. So this interaction escalates toward the end until Jesus finally makes the statement, I am telling you, before Abraham was born, I am. At which time the leaders try to stone him. That was the darkness of their hearts being exposed, okay? So it's within this intentionally planned scenario by God, not only among the colossal man-made lampstands, but also in the presence of a deceptive darkness that's opposing him. This is when Jesus speaks these strong and eloquent words and promise. He's basically telling the Pharisees and the crowd that surrounds him that not only is he the light to dispel the darkness of sin, but I have the authority of my Father to do so. But I think it's worth noting really quickly that the adulterous woman was convicted, and out of her conviction, she was drawn toward the light of Jesus, the love of Jesus, the safety of Jesus. Yet the religious leaders, it also says they were convicted, but they rejected and walked away from the light. Why? Because they didn't like what the light of truth was revealing within them at this time. Okay? So again, the woman was drawn toward the grace, the love, the power of Jesus. In this moment, he was proving himself to be a light worthy of our attention. While his enemies felt more comfortable in the darkness of their sin, they walked away into it. And so the opposition of Jesus tried to silence his words, but instead Jesus had the power to silence his enemy, and they're seemingly trying to control him. When they try to stone him, he eludes it and he is home free, right? So however, it's in this metaphorical statement isn't just metaphorical about the light and I'm light and I'm like that, kind of like the bread was very metaphorical. But this is actually a very literal statement as well. Because 1 John 1:5 says, God is light, and in him is no darkness. So we know God is spirit. We're taught that, right? We know God is love, right? Those are tangible noun, not just descriptions. And here, 1 John 1:5 says, and God is light. To enhance that, we go back to the Old Testament. We know that in the Old Testament, after some time on the mountain with God, Moses descended and his face was, we're told, shining with the glory of God. That literal transference of God as light was reflected in Moses's face, right? His face was reflecting that literal glow of God. However, we know from Moses, it faded over time over his face, right? It didn't last forever because it was temporary. As part of the new covenant, God decided to make his light visible within the flesh of Jesus. Literally, God's light is wrapped within the flesh of Jesus. Colossians 1:15 says Jesus is the image of the invisible God. This is a literal statement that Jesus is saying as well. So he isn't just comparing himself to light as he did with the bread, but he's expressing a literal truth. I am the light that never fades, and I have come to silence the darkness once and for all. These lampstands can't do it. I am silencing the darkness of the Pharisees around me. This is a perfect time to make and state this claim and this declaration of my deity. Okay, so nutshell, Jesus is saying, God temporarily illuminated your ancestors' way from slavery in Egypt through the wilderness to the promised land, right? But Jesus is saying, here and now, I will permanently illuminate your path from your slavery to sin through the darkness of the world to the eternal light and life with the Father in heaven. Okay, so that journey is being reflected in what Jesus is saying. But what does that mean for us today? How do we apply all of that to us today? Well, I have 4 purposes behind Jesus' statement that we can consider when he says, I am the light of the world. The first one is very obvious. It's within what he says. Number 1, his light rescues us from darkness. Like I said, very obvious. But he says, whoever follows me, follows the light, will not walk in darkness. Now, I think it's obvious to all of us that we live in a very morally dark world. There's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of sin rampant. Murder, abortion, adultery, neglect of elderly, neglect of children. The depressing list goes on and on and on. And Paul, we've talked about before, he references the darkness of this world as a demonic influence, as a spiritual oppression, right? The spiritual forces of darkness are always at work in the dark, right? Somebody once said, like, most crimes don't happen in the daytime. They happen at night, in the dark, right? The enemy works in the dark. But there's different areas of darkness that we need to be understand that the enemy works within. The first one would be understanding that people love the darkness. Like the Pharisees, they gravitated back toward the darkness because they didn't like what the light exposed, right? John 3:19-21 says this, light has come into the world, but people loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were so evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. Like I said, precisely the state of the Pharisees. But understand that there are blatant sinners living in darkness, but there are equally righteous sinners who are unaware living in darkness. They're unrepentant of sins, of hidden sins that are in their heart, right? They're also living in darkness, which is why that study that I talked about last week, only 22% of people who attend church actually are impacted and changed. Why? Because there's still a darkness that they're gravitating toward, that they are comfortable in, okay? So there's this darkness of love that we have that we adjust our eyes to the dark, right? We become comfortable with it. But also, according to Romans 1:21, there's a darkness of heart. Because Romans 1:21 says, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So we have darkness of deeds that people want to stay in. We have a darkness of heart that comes over us in those positions, in that place of of deeds of darkness, but there's also a darkness of mind that's mentioned in 2 Corinthians 4:4. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. So go back to the Pharisees. Jesus proclaimed to be the light of the world, but the Pharisees couldn't see it. They couldn't see it not because the light failed to shine, but because they were blind to it. There was a spiritual blindness. The woman saw it because of repentance, right? And a desire to be rescued from that darkness. So all that to say, there are areas of darkness that we need to be aware of, that we need the light of Jesus to rescue us from, that dark worldly deeds, those dark hearts, those dark minds. And if you want to pray for somebody that doesn't know Jesus, you pray for the eyes of their hearts to be open. You pray for their minds to be willing to be open. You pray that their deeds would be exposed. There are specific prayers that we can pray over unbelievers for them to be rescued by Jesus. Without the light of Jesus, we remain trapped in that darkness, that fog, and that confusion, right? It's like trying to navigate life without seeing reality, because within the domain of darkness, there's deception, and there's this downward spiral toward deterioration of mind and heart. You know why I think there are so many mental illnesses rampant now, more so than ever? Because the world has gone farther away from the light. And what happens when you have an extended amount of time in darkness? Have you ever been to the caves, the stalagmites, and all those where you get deep in? There is absolutely no light. And there are stories of people who have been trapped, and within a couple of days, their mind begins to deteriorate in the darkness. They become disoriented. They can no longer make clear decisions. That is where I think the mental instability of our world is stemming from, is people have become so encroached in the darkness that they don't understand that there's a light or a way out anymore. And then that isn't just unbelievers. Believers can fall into that same trap when we have hidden sins that are deep within us, that are in the darkness of hidden places that we don't expose, that we don't confess, that we don't repent of. But Jesus is saying, I can obliterate the darkness when there is repentance. John 12:46 says, I have come into the world as a light so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. This is the worst example I could give because I hate rodents and creepy collies, but you go into a dark garage, you turn on the light, what do you think? What happens, right? They all scatter and they go hide because they like the darkness, right? But that's what happens when the light of Jesus is turned on in our hearts and our minds. There's things that are exposed that we can see. And those things cannot live in the light of Jesus. If that is what we are ruminating in and allowing it to illuminate in us, those things cannot remain within us. They are completely dissolved under the power of the light of Jesus, which is why it's so important that we allow the light to be shined in our Christian hearts as well as an unbeliever's heart, because there's too many areas where the enemy can hide in crevices. We've got to expose that with the light. So close proximity to Jesus is where we are rescued from a state of spiritual blindness, where lies are exposed so that the enemy of darkness cannot grip us in any part of our being. The light has to shine in our heart, our soul, our mind, our bodies, right? Just like with my backstage story, the further I got away from the light, the less I saw, the less I could discern. It's the same spiritually true, right? Which leads me to the second point. Not only does his light rescue us, but number two, his light guides us through the journey. The light, the fire at night for the Israelites was to guide them in the darkness, right? And in the ancient world, light was associated with life, and darkness was signified death and danger. So there was a very complete contrast between light and darkness, metaphorically as well. And Jesus within us only illuminates inside of us, right? Darkness is still present around us. And so we need a guide as we're walking through this journey of the world, a flashlight, so to speak, to direct us. And Jesus promises that those who follow him will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. This means we don't have to face confusion or moral uncertainty alone. His light illuminates our path, guiding us through difficult decisions and challenges of the life we have to live on this earth. And the best way to get that light is his word. Psalm 119, 105 says, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. We better know the word, because the word is what's going to illuminate the way for us to go. Psalm 43:3 also says, oh, send out your light and your truth. What is his truth? The words that Jesus spoke. Let them lead me. So we don't have to stumble through life blindly. The same light that led the Israelites by night in the wilderness leads us in our hearts and our minds still today. And remember, the wilderness was between the bondage of slavery and the promised land, right? Earth is between our freedom from sin and our promised eternal life to come. We have to have that light guiding us. But good news is we all know one day that darkness will cease altogether, right? That light that will lead us home will lead us to our eternal home that we've talked about in heaven in Revelation 21. No need for a moon, no need for lamps, no need for a sun. Only the sun, the light, will illuminate all of New Jerusalem. And that is our hope, that the light of Jesus will soon banish all the darkness permanently. But until then, we need the word and the presence of Jesus not only to guide us, but we also must allow, number 3, his light to transform us. So his light transforms us. Everybody knows the first mention of light, right? Where is it? Genesis, right? It says the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. Now, according to the original Hebrew, before light, what it's saying is the earth was empty, it was chaotic, and it was obscure. There was no form to it at all. But light transformed it, filling it with color and shape and dimension. It was no longer chaos, but it was order. And light brought life to that formless place. I read this, and I want to read this to you as a description of what physical light does to transform our surrounding. This is a quote from National Geographic, an article entitled Power of Light. This is how it says light transforms. In all its forms, visible and invisible, light saturates the universe. Light is light, airy light. It's pure, but not simple or easily described. Yet light reveals the world to us. Body and soul, we crave it. Light sets our biological clocks. We all know that in the Northwest, right? It triggers in our brains the sensations of color. Light feeds us, supplying energy of plants to grow. Light is almost like air. It's a given. But there are exceptions. Certain moments of sudden appreciation and inspiration when a particular manifestation of light, a transitory glory appears, such as a rainbow, a brilliant sunset, a pulse of heat lightning in the dark sky, the shimmering surface of the sea at twilight, and the flickering of a candle, or the flooding that floods a room with romance. Usually, though, we don't see the light, we merely see with it. I love that phrase. We don't usually see the light, but we merely see with it. And just as light transforms the world around us into these beautiful things to observe, the light of Jesus not only dispels the darkness, but it transforms our hearts and our minds into these inspiring and beautiful masterpieces. His light invades the voids in our lives and our hearts and our minds, and he brings form and purpose and definition and color and identity to our personality, to our being, to that space that was once empty. He fills it with these manifestations of himself by the way of his light. His light also transforms chaos to peace within us. His light transforms sorrow to joy. His light transforms despair to hope. The truths of Jesus and his teachings and his ways should renew our once darkened minds, right? And transform every aspect of our being into the likeness and character of Jesus. And what's so beautiful is every single person is a different reflection of beauty, because God is so intricate and so independent in how he shines his light in you to display it to the world. Everyone has a unique, just like every single sunset is different. You cannot have an identical sunset. Every single person is a beautiful reflection in that same way when we allow his light to transform us. But sadly, so many settle for a lesser light. The Israelites were notorious for falling into worshiping the sun, the moon. People still look at stars to guide their lives through horoscopes and astrology, right? Or how about the dim light of our cell phone? How many look for that validation to light up their life? How many look for that purpose to light up their life, that how many likes they got, or who noticed their post, or what are people saying about how I can better myself? You know, perfect analogy is most people are like a moth to a flame when it comes to social media. We are drawn to it, but it's a false light. It's a temporary light, just like the bread was temporary. This is a false sense of security. It's a false sense of purpose. It's a false setup for a better life, a brighter life, right? All of those will fail to transform in such a way that reflects the heart and the mind and the truth of Jesus. That is only a reflection of another human being. That is not true light. We must reflect the true light, which leads me to my final purpose of transforming light of Jesus. Number 4, his light is to be repurposed through us. Do you realize this is the only I am statement that Jesus turns it around and gives us a responsibility to implement? He doesn't tell anyone, hey, I'm the bread, now you're the bread. He doesn't say, I'm the good shepherd in the door, now you go be a good shepherd in the door. This is the only one where he turns it around and repurposes it and says, now you have a responsibility. In Matthew 5:14-16, it says, you are the light of the world. He's saying this to his disciples. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. And it's very agreed upon scholars that when that phrase was spoken, they were talking about the illumination of the temple. So when he said that, everybody will know that light that is illuminating and seen 70, 80 miles away, just like that, cannot be hidden, right? He continues, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So now that we are in relationship with Jesus, now that we are aware of the darkness, now that his light shines within us, it is our calling to carry it out to those around us. With great light comes great responsibility. The light should be transforming us in such a way that people notice. Just as the moon is only a reflection of the sun, our life should reflect the Son, God's Son. We should be reflecting Jesus' love for God and for man. We should reflect his humility, his strength and his tenderness, his graciousness, his self-control, his submissive nature. All the things that we know of Jesus and we learn from his truth that is transforming us should begin to be reflected through us. Because Jesus not only says he's the light, remember, he proves it by the way he speaks truth with grace and love in a consistent manner. In the same way, our life should be proof that the light of Jesus resides in us and shines through us. Again, to use the analogy, like a moth drawn to light, others who are striving to find their way through the dark will be drawn toward your joy. Oh, I want some of that. Or your peace in the midst of all the chaos. Oh, I want some of that. People will be drawn toward the light that you exude from you. But how do you know if you're shining the light of Jesus? I think it's pretty evident by what happened with the woman caught in adultery. People will be drawn to your joy, your grace, your forgiveness, your mercy, the way she was drawn to Jesus. They'll be drawn toward your hopeful demeanor, or they will turn away from it so that their own sins are not exposed. You're going to have two reactions, right? How others respond to the light that we exude is not our responsibility, but we are responsible and commanded to be the light of Jesus, regardless of whether people accept it, are drawn to it, or reject it. That's how Jesus lived. I'll close with this little story that Ayla, my granddaughter, she loves to play in the dark with a flashlight, making the shadow figures on the wall or flashlight tag, or I have to be a kitty cat and I'm chasing the light that she's moving all over the place and throwing on the ceiling. It's fun. She loves it. However, the other day we were upstairs in the room. The flashlight kept turning off. I don't know if it was a bad battery or a short within it or something, but for whatever reason, the light kept just going out. But I'm sitting there playing this and she's frustrated. And I'm like, it just got me thinking about this message regarding light. Light is either on or it's not. Right? It either shines or it doesn't. The light of Jesus, just like that flashlight, either shines or it doesn't. As the light of the world, Jesus never took a neutral stance in any situation. Do you realize that? In all of his conversations and all of his encounters and all of the situations that he has come across, he never took a neutral. You do you. Ever. His light was either on, but it was never off because he can't. But for us, it could be on or it could be off. His light and love were always on display, and that is my biggest challenge for us today. To not take a neutral stance in the world around us, with the people around us. I don't think we have time to be neutral anymore. I really don't. Are we making a conscious choice to reflect the light of Jesus at all times in all situations? If not, how can we grow in that responsibility? Who is somebody that needs to see the light of Jesus? Regardless of what they do with it, who needs to see it? Are we going to be the people that are willing to repurpose the light as God commanded us to do? We've gleaned so many benefits from it. It's not ours to withhold from others. It's our duty to share it and pass it on.